Insurance is one of those things we forget about until we need it, kind of like a spare tire. This is why National Insurance Awareness Day exists and is celebrated every year on June 28th. While the origin of this day is a mystery, what's widely known is how important insurance is in many aspects of our lives, from car insurance to health insurance to home insurance and more. These policies offer a layer of protection to guard us from feeling the harshest of blows by unfortunate events. You're welcome to International News Desk on Equa Television. Tonight, news begins with G7 United Nations condemn deplorable Russian attack on Kremenchuk Mall. America kills senior leader of Al-Qaeda-linked group in Syria. Iran seeks to join BRICS group of emerging countries. Dozens of people found dead in a truck in San Antonio, Texas, as fuel restricted for private cars to Sri Lanka under virtual lockdown. In a statement on Monday, the leaders of the G7 have condemned a deadly Russian missile raid on a crowded Ukrainian shopping mall as an abominable war crime. The G7 leaders, who are having a meeting in Germany, swore that the Russian President Vladimir Putin and those responsible for the attack will be held accountable. Not more than 18 people were killed in the attacks on the city of Kremenchuk, while 59 were wounded. Indiscriminate attacks on innocent civilians constitute a war crime, the G7 statement added. Ukraine accused Russia of intentionally aiming civilians, with President Volodymyr Zelensky calling it one of the most shameless terrorist acts in European history in his evening broadcast post on Telegram. Ukraine's Air Force Command said the mall was hit by two long-range X-22 missiles fired from two 22 M3 bombers that flew from Sheikovka airfield in Russia's Kuluga region. Dmitry Polyansky, Russia's deputy ambassador to the United Nations, wrote on Twitter without citing evidence that the attack was a Ukrainian provocation, exactly what Kyiv government needs to keep focus on Ukraine before the NATO summit, he said, referring to the alliance's Madrid gathering due to begin on Tuesday. Boris Johnson, British Prime Minister, speaking from the G7 assembly in the Bavarian Alps, said the Kremenchuk raid demonstrated Putin's depths of cruelty and barbarism. Putin must understand that his behavior will do nothing but reinforce the resolve that the United Kingdom and every other G7 country stand by the Ukraine for as long as it takes, he said. U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken said the world was horrified, while United Nations Chief Antonio Guterres' office condemned the attack as totally deplorable. Kremenchuk had so far been secure from direct hits in the conflict. A spokesperson for Guterres, Stephanie Dujarric, said, according to reports, "We once again stress that the parties are obliged under international humanitarian law to protect civilians and civilian infrastructure," he added. French President Emmanuel Macron also denounced the attack as an abomination. The President of the European Commission, Charles Michel, slammed Russian for what he called a horrendous and indiscriminate attack on Kremenchuk. Russian scare and intimidation tactics will never work, he wrote on Twitter. Ukraine will prevail with support of its partners at G7 and beyond. Diplomats said the United Nations Security Council is scheduled to hold an emergency meeting in New York on Tuesday to discuss the attack. The Russian raid on Monday echoed attacks earlier in the war that caused large numbers of civilian casualties, such as one in March on Mariupol theater, where many civilians had holed up, killing an estimated 600, and another in April on a train station in eastern Kramatorsk that left at least 59 people dead. Moscow denies, however, targeting civilians. The G7, meanwhile, unveiled plans to seek new sanctions on Russia, including a price cap on oil and higher tariffs on goods. They also pledged to continue supporting Ukraine for as long as it takes, in a joint statement Monday after they held a session by video link with Zelensky. The leaders underlined their unwavering commitment to support the government and people of Ukraine in their courageous defense of their country's sovereignty and territorial integrity. Elsewhere, the United States appeared ready to respond to Zelensky's call for more air defense systems, while in Brussels, NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg announced plans to greatly expand the alliance's rapid reaction forces as part of its response to an era of strategic competition. The NATO response force currently has about 40,000 soldiers. NATO will agree to deliver further military support to Ukraine, including secure communication and anti-drone systems, when its leaders convene in Spain for a summit on Tuesday, Stoltenberg said. On Monday, the United States military says it carried out an attack in Syria's Idlib province that aimed a senior leader of an al-Qaeda-aligned Huras al-Din group, Abu Hamza al-Yemeni, while he was traveling alone on a motorcycle, the United States Central Command said in a statement, adding that a preliminary evaluation did not show civilian casualties. More from the statement said the removal of the senior leader will disrupt Al-Qaeda's ability to carry out attacks against U.S. citizens, our partners, and innocent civilians around the world. The Syrian Civil Defense, a humanitarian organization, said in a tweet that a man was killed shortly before midnight after his motorcycle was aimed with 2 rockets, adding it has transferred the body to the forensic department in Idlib city. On business and economy, an Iranian official said on Monday, Iran has given an application to become a member of the group of emerging economies known as the BRICS. Iran's membership in the BRICS group, which includes Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, will result in extra values for both sides, Iran Foreign Ministry spokesperson said. Spokeswoman Maria Zakharova, Russian Foreign Ministry, said separately that Argentina had also applied to join the group. Argentinian officials could not be reached for immediate comment. Argentina's President Alberto Fernandez, presently in Europe, has in recent days restated his wish for Argentina to join BRICS. While the White House was thinking about what else to turn off in the world ban or oil, Argentina and Iran applied to join the BRICS, Zakharova said, according to reports. Russia has before now been pushing to forge closer ties with Asia, South America, and the Middle East, but it has increased its efforts recently to weather sanctions imposed by Europe, the United States, and other countries over its invasion of Ukraine. The United States and other Western nations on Monday pledged staunch backing for Ukraine after 28 civilians were killed in several Russian attacks, including a missile raid on a crowded shopping center. Russia refutes aiming civilians in what it calls a special military operation to disarm Ukraine and protect it from fascists. Kyiv and its allies in the West say the war is an unprovoked act of aggression. In San Antonio, Texas, not more than 46 people have been found dead inside a tractor trailer in what seems to be a human trafficking attempt along the United States-Mexico border. San Antonio Fire Chief Charles Hood said 16 other people found in the trailer on Monday were transported to the hospital for heat stroke and exhaustion, including 4 minors. Police Chief William McManus said a city worker at the scene was notified of the situation by a cry for help shortly before 6 p.m. on Monday, 23 GMT. Officers arrived to find a body on the ground outside the trailer and a partly open gate to the trailer, he said. The vehicle was found next to railway tracks in a remote area on the city's southern outskirts, and McManus said 3 people were taken into custody over the incident. Mexico's Foreign Minister Marcelo Ebrard called the suffocation of the refugees and migrants a tragedy in Texas and said the local embassy was en route to the scene. He said 2 Guatemalans were among the victims and that the trailer had fake European Union plates. Still on the news, Sri Lanka suddenly restricted fuel supplies and told residents to stay home, rising the danger of more chaos as the government struggles to make available vital goods due to a paralyzing sovereign debt crisis that has hit the country for months. On Monday, the island nation's cabinet of ministers agreed to limit distribution of fuel to essential services until July 10th. Spokesman Mandula Gunawardena said, according to reports, adding that interprovincial public transport would possibly come to a stop. Ranil Wickremesinghe, Sri Lankan Prime Minister told lawmakers that week the economy had completely collapsed, saying the island nation is incapable to buy fuel as shortages of fundamentals and electricity deteriorate. His government is in deliberations with the International Monetary Fund (IMF) as well as bilateral creditors such as India and China for new funds to pay for imports after it defaulted on its dollar bonds earlier this year and saw foreign reserves decrease. The government had already shut public schools and asked civil servants to work from home to restrict transport, leaving several roads in and around the capital, Colombo, deserted over the past days, even as many of vehicles lined up in queues stretching for kilometers waiting for filling stations to be refilled. Ferocious protests exploded in May after President Gotabaya Rajapaksa's brother resigned as prime minister following clashes between government supporters and opponents. Although Rajapaksa has since shored up support in parliament and vowed to serve out the final 2 years in his term, tensions remain high. Sri Lanka's strategies permit foreign companies to dispense fuel in a bid to ease crippling shortages that have paralyzed most economic activity, Energy Minister Kanchana Wajasekara said Sunday. The governor of the Central Bank of Sri Lanka has agreed to pay outstanding dues to companies for fuel supplies, with a plan, the president's office said in a statement late Monday. President Rajapaksa also ordered officials to take immediate action to import fuel using the existing funds available until then, it said without further explanation. The government is sending its representative to Qatar and Russia this week to secure new supplies and is hoping for the approval from India of a $500 million credit line for fuel imports. The High Commissioner of Sri Lanka to New Delhi, Melinda Murugoda, met with India's Minister of Petroleum and Natural Gas and Housing and Urban Affairs Hardip Sai Puri in New Delhi on Monday to deliberate the likelihood of securing petrol and diesel supplies that are needed by the island nation on a crucial basis. More stories says Pakistan detains man connected to Mumbai attacks for terror financing. On Monday, Pakistan has sentenced one of the men connected to the Mumbai attacks to 15 years in prison for terror financing unrelated to the 2008 assaults, according to court documents. In 2020, Sajid Majid Mir, 43, was detained and condemned in May this year, according to the documents, but his detention and sentencing were never disclosed to Pakistan, reports say. He was sought by the FBI in linking with the 2008 attacks on India's financial hub that killed 166 people, including 6 Americans. The United States presented up to $5 million for information on Mir's alleged participation in the attacks in neighboring India under its Rewards for Justice program. The court documents gave no details of Mir's involvement in terror financing. In November 2008, a group of 10 young attackers who allegedly sailed from Karachi hijacked an Indian fishing boat, killed its captain and took a rubber dinghy into Mumbai. They then systematically attacked high-end hotels and train station, a hospital and a Jewish community center over 3 chaotic days. The 10 were suspected members of Lashkar-e-Taiba, a Pakistan-based armed group, and Indian investigators later said their actions were directed by phone by handlers in Pakistan. 9 of the attackers were killed by Indian forces. Ajmal Kasab, the lone survivor, was arrested, tried and later hanged by Indian authorities. Mir was designated a terrorist by the US and was indicted in 2011. He was on the FBI's 10 most wanted fugitive list. His whereabouts were not publicly known until the Pakistani newspaper The Dawn reported over the weekend that he had been quietly arrested in Gujranwala, a city in Punjab province. It said Mir's sentencing appeared to be part of attempts made by Pakistan to get off the grey list of the Financial Action Task Force. The Paris-based group added Pakistan to the list in 2018. The grey list is composed of countries with a high risk of money laundering and terrorism financing, but which have officially committed to working with the task force to make changes. According to the Pakistani court documents, Mir was a member of a charity set up by Hafiz Saeed, who had also been declared a terrorist by the US Justice Department and had a $10 million bounty on his head. Highest court in Philippines rejects last bid to stop Marcos' presidency. The Supreme Court in Philippines has rejected a last bid to disqualify President-elect Fernando Marcos from last month's election, clearing the way for his inauguration later this week and the return to rule of the country's most famous dynasty. Marcos, 64, the son and namesake of the notorious dictator ousted in the 1986 People Power Revolt, won the May 9th election in a landslide and will be sworn in on Thursday for a 6-year term. Activists had appealed to the court to downturn the Election Commission dismissal of their petitions, which pursued the disqualification of Marcos before the ballots because of his decades-old tax violations, which they argued made him unqualified to run. 13 justices voted to dismiss the petitions, while 2 did not take part, the court said. The Marcos camp did not instantly respond to a request for comment, but has before now rejected the petitions as attempts to shamble his campaign. Rivals of the Marcos family have been annoyed by what they see as its methodical use of social media to attempt to change historical narratives of plunder, wealth and state-sponsored brutality during the last era of Marcos' rule. The family and its allies amassed an estimated $10 billion in ill-gotten wealth in the 1970s and the 1980s, a government commission found. The Marcos family has denied wrongdoing and says countless historical accounts of that period was falsehood. In Africa, Abdel Fattah Burhan of Sudan visits Al-Fashaqqa after 7 of his soldiers killed by Ethiopia. Sudan on Monday, General Abdel Fattah Burhan, head of Sudan's ruling sovereign council, visited Al-Fashaqqa in the east after Ethiopia killed 7 Sudanese soldiers and a civilian in the border area. The event was the latest sign of worsening ties between the East African nations. A Sudanese military statement late Sunday described the killings as a cowardly act and said Khartoum would retaliate. The statement adding that the killings violated all laws and customs of war and international humanitarian law. It said Ethiopia exhibited the bodies out in the open. It did not offer more details, including how a civilian farmer was involved. Another statement on Monday said Sudan's foreign ministry said the 8 had been taken into Ethiopia after the soldiers were held captive in an area inside Sudan on June 22nd. The ministry said it was recalling the Sudanese ambassador from the Ethiopian capital Addis Ababa and beckoned the Ethiopian representative in Khartoum to protest the killing. It also said it will complain to the United Nations. Ethiopia's foreign ministry affirmed the killings in what it defined rather as a tragic incident. It said in a statement that a Sudanese military unit crossed into Ethiopia with the support of rebels from the Tigray region and suggested when they were killed. Ties between the two neighbors have declined in recent years amidst a long-running border dispute over large swaths of agricultural land in the Al-Fashaqqa area. Sudan claims the lands are within its border according to an agreement that defined the boundary between their territories in the early 90s. Mohamed Biavogi, Guinea's prime minister, meets political parties to ease tensions. Mohamed Biavogi, Guinean Prime Minister, has met with political parties to reduce tensions after the National Front for the Defense of the Constitution, FNDC, suspended its call for a demonstration that was due to be the first main protest rally under the now ruling junta. The FNDC had called for people to take to the street on Thursday in rebelliousness of a fresh protest bar publicized by the military leaders who toppled former President Alpha Conde in September. Guinea has been ruled by a military junta since Colonel Mamadi Doumbouya deposed President Alpha Conde in September 2021. The authorities have set the duration of the transition at 3 years. This meeting between the country's political forces comes less than a week before a summit of the Economic Community of West African States, ECOWAS, which is probable to agree on an extension of economic sanctions. 2 attempts at consultations have already taken place since early 2002, but they were boycotted by a number of organizations, including the National Alliance for Change and Democracy, ANAD, and the National Front for the Defense of the Constitution, FNDC. Both political coalitions were present this time. The FNDC, which had arranged months of mobilization against Mr. Conde from 2019 to 2021, has suspended Wednesday its call for a demonstration against the duration of the transition to give a chance to the dialogue proposed by the Prime Minister. He stood as a prerequisite for its involvement in the dialogue, the acceptance of a mediator of ECOWAS. Conversely, the Rassemblement du Peuple de Guinea, the former ruling party, refused to take part and conditioned its participation on the release of its imprisoned leaders and an end to the persecution and arrest of political leaders. Mr. Biavogi closed by asking participants to send their contributions by July 1st. He did not set any new meeting dates. And finally, Angola, Mozambique finds answers to fossil fears at the United Nations Ocean Conference. The NSNS decreed in Lisbon can only be overcome if humanity succeeds to resolve different contradictions. For example, the deep sea mining of fossil energy resources hits with the preservation of the oceans. There are policymakers among oil exporting countries conscious of the need for new resolutions. Angola's President João Lourenço is one of them. Heads of state and government, representatives of the scientific community, the private sector and civil society will pursue at the summit to get answers to the rising need to implement new paradigms of sustainable exploitation of the huge resources that the oceans place at our disposal, which we must find to exploit in an increasingly sustainable way and preserve for future generations. Fossil resources are springs of wealth that no country can do without, as Mozambique's Minister of the Sea explains, especially when they allow other development aims to be reached. Lydia Cardoso, Minister of Sea, Inland Waters and Fisheries, says, although we know that the issue of exploration of hydrocarbons, like other explorations that are done at sea, has some bad effects. No, if we don't control the situations, we have other benefits that are connected to our development indexes. Naturally, for a country like ours, we have to resort to these resources in order to overcome certain needs that are pressing in society. The balance is gentle but possible, although an energy paradigm shift is required. Professor David Johnson is the coordinator of the Global Ocean Biodiversity Initiative, GOBI. He said oil and gas industry has been completely controlled, and biodiversity can coexist with sustainable operations if they are appropriately registered with environmental impact assessment, he says. And I understand in developing countries, revenues are tremendously important. I understand we are in a crisis of fossil fuel need at the moment. However, the bigger crisis, the bigger picture is the climate, is the effect it's having on the ocean. João Parceiro Monteiro said to face this challenge, the action of political decision makers or economic agents is not enough. After all, we are all energy consumers. To remind us, G7, United Nations condemned deplorable Russian attack on Kremenchuk Mall. America kills senior leader of Al-Qaeda-linked group in Syria. Iran seeks to join BRICS group for emerging countries. Dozens of people found dead in a truck in San Antonio, Texas, and as fuel restricted for private cars, Sri Lanka under virtual lockdown. That's all we have for you tonight. Have a good evening.